I was looking around the internet a little while ago, and I actually found a video by Geraldcraft. They're a amazing builder. Link in the description to their channel. But the video that I actually found this time was actually about them making a tutorial on how to make custom items, which I actually enjoyed a lot because the way that they actually did this is through custom attributes or attributes in general, enchantments, custom names. And these are the kinds of things that I used to do like 8-ish years ago. So it really, I don't know, it gave some nostalgia to me. The one part that it kind of ignored, however, was custom model data, which is how you would go about retexturing or even remodeling an item to be something completely unique without changing the original item. So, for example, you could make a netherite sword look like a giant 3D model blade without changing every single netherite sword in existence. Really cool. Yeah, anyhow, so basically he didn't really touch on that subject. The reason for that being that he just hasn't learned how to do that yet. It's completely valid. But I just kind of felt like it was missing, and I was like, well, maybe people will be interested in it anyway, even if a smaller channel uploads it. So I was like, hey, might as well just upload a video, explain how to use custom model data to create custom 2D items and 3D items. I won't be able to pack this into an 8-minute video because I'm already talking for 2 minutes, but, you know, I'll do my best. Right, so let's get started with a table of contents, if you will. It's basically just what am I actually going to be doing in this tutorial. Right, so the first part is going to have to be what kind of things are you going to have to download, right? So what programs are you going to have to install, etc, etc. Don't worry, I've got all the links already down in the description, so you can just like click those and just install. Then we're going to get started with making a 2-dimensional item. We're going to start with 2D because it's actually just a bit simpler. So we can kind of just try something out, and then after we're kind of ready and kind of understand how the system works, then we can get going on a 3D item. If your end goal is a 2D item, then obviously you can just stop watching after that. But if you want a 3D item, I highly recommend that you do watch a part about the 2D item, because like I said, that's kind of where I lay the groundwork for understanding how to make a 3D item. So yeah, that's kind of that. Let's get started. Alright, so let's get started by everything that you need to actually download. Right, so let's just get started with the installables first, because this is a decently long list. I'm sorry in advance. Right, so let's get started first. Visual Studio Code. It is basically used for opening folder structures, opening code, doing stuff like that. Basically, it's a code editor, it's really useful, it's basically essential. Next up, you have Pack.mcmeta, or basically any other image editor software. You basically just need to open the textures and be able to change them. So anything works. If you Photoshop, that also works. Basically, just don't use Microsoft Paint, and we're good. Then, next up, you have Blockbench, that is used for 3D models. In it, you can also change textures, but it is just a bit less user-friendly in some aspects, such as copying textures from one area to another. So I do still, even if you are only making 3D models, recommend downloading Pack.mcmeta or some other image editing software. Right. Those are the installables all done. Then you have, first of all, obviously the starting points, just a resource pack. I put basically what I start with in the description of the video. You can just download that and just have exactly what I have, and then work with that. Next up, you're going to need the vanilla assets, because reasons I'm yet to get into, but you're going to have to remodel some items into being themselves, for which you need to know what they are normally as, so you're going to have the vanilla assets of the game, for which I actually have a tutorial that you can just follow. It's like 4 minutes long. You can just get all the assets really easy for whatever version you need, because obviously if you have 1.23, then that would be completely different than 1.19.4. Maybe, maybe not. I have no idea. That version isn't out yet, and maybe it's not. Right. Lastly, if you have questions, if you need help with anything at all, you can join my Discord and go to the asking for help section and just ask. I can't promise that I'll help, but I'll try. Right, so that should be the very long list of things that you need to do that I'm also going to have to all put into a description. All done. Right, so, yeah, let's go ahead and get started, I guess. Right, so let's get started by simply going over and putting the starting point inside of our resource packs folder. So for that, all we're going to have to do is go to escape, options, resource packs, and then clicking on open pack folder. This will open your resource packs menu and you can just put the zip into here and then unzip it. Now I can simply, after I open this resource pack, I can right click and click on open with code to open it with Visual Studio Code. If you don't have that button there, then all you'll have to do is go ahead and simply open Visual Studio Code, click on the Explorer tab and click on open folder, and then you can simply paste in the path to your resource pack and click on select map, and voila, we have the resource pack. Now, first things first, Pack.mcmeta. What this is how your resource packs tells your game exactly what kind of a resource pack it is. So basically you have pack formats, which is basically saying, hey, this is for version 13 of the game, which obviously means 1.19.4. It used to go up by 1 every version, and then they changed it to go up by 1 per snapshot-ish. So now it goes up by a variable amount that is basically unpredictable, and if this isn't the right number for you, just up it by 1 until it is. Yay. But yeah, anyhow, 13 is 1.9.4, and this is just a description saying, hey, this is what it is, it's made by me, and it is for this version of Minecraft. Right, so, alright, so now we should be ready to actually get going on making our custom item, right? So, for the first test, what I'm thinking is just making a retextured version of bread and making it just look like something custom. That's kind of all that I really want. It should be fine. Right, so for this, it is going to be a case of we're going to have to look at our vanilla assets, right? So this is the vanilla assets that I have on my computer. Now I'm going to look over at models, item, and look at bread. So if I search here for bread, you can tell there's a bread.json model. This is a model that it basically just renders bread, right? So this is just what is used. So if I copy that over to my resource pack into my items folder, now I am remodeling bread. Anyone who has this resource pack on is going to see bread as something entirely new, exactly the same as normal Minecraft. Right, so obviously that's not entirely what I want. However, I don't actually want to change any of this, because what that would do is make it that bread renders differently consistently. So what I'm instead going to do is actually take a book out of, if I go to my search again, for example, a bow. Because what you know that a bow is actually it looks like a bow, but if you start pulling, then you have an arrow. And then the further that you pull, the further the arrow looks in the texture. So for that, a bow, you can tell, it's a bit more complicated. It has a display property to actually say exactly how it should render, and how it should be positioned or rotated, but it also has overrides. So this is a override called pulling. Pulling is a 1 or a 0. So if it is 1, then it is being actively drawn back and you should render that one. If it is pulling and you have a pull of 0.65 or higher, then you should render this one. And then if you have a pull of 0.9 or higher, then you should render this one. So you can tell that basically it uses the lowest value that has all of its predicates as true. So you can tell that, it is pulling and it is fully drawn back. Well, then that would be this. If it would be, halfway done, then it wouldn't be, 90% done. It also wouldn't be 65% done. So then you simply have this model. And if you're not pulling back, well, then you simply just use what you always do and have a bow. Now, what you can use for this, actually what we are going to do, is copy paste first of all. And then let's just say for convenience sake 3, right? And then change this to something else, right? So, this is obviously referring to a specific thing. We're still making that, so for now we can just leave it blank. Obviously, it will refer to an actual model. Right, so basically what this does is I now have a list of overrides, of a total of 1 override, and instead of pulling back the bow, this is an override of custom model data. So what this is basically custom model data is obviously the actual Minecraft side of it is just a number. That's all. So what this resource pack only has access to is that number. And basically all that this check is saying, hey, if the custom model data is 3 or higher, use this. Right? That's the entirety of the predicate. You can combine this, obviously, as well with like pulling and pull in order to make a custom bow. With, animations and stuff. That all works. But yeah, right, so because this is 3 or higher, what you would have is if you would want another one, obviously you would have, maybe 1 and then 2. Then it would use this one if you have 2, this one if you have 1. If you flip them, then obviously it will always use this one because 1 is smaller than 2, so anything that matches this one will also match that one. Bit of a long explanation, but I feel like I just needed to really explain how this works, because otherwise you're gonna get confused. Right. Next thing is this actual number. If you pick the number 1, and if another resource pack picks the number 1, then you are never going to be able to actually merge them together because, well, they both have the same number. So what data packers often do, who all need to remodel the same items, is we all basically just have our own numbers. They have to be below 8 digits because once you get into 8 digits, then you start having inaccuracies, like multiple numbers being the same number. I don't really understand how that works, but that's how it does, so you try to keep it below that threshold. Anyhow, so yeah, we basically all just have our own kind of, prefix that every single data pack has, and then afterwards you can have a number which is actually the item that you want. So if I would want another item texturing bread, then that would be that. So, proper data packs actually catalog exactly what prefix number that they have, and so that they know that no other data pack uses the same number. I just spam my keyboard and make something random. They both function equally well. Right, so now what I want is to actually have a custom model that is going to get used, right? Obviously still 2D, but it is actually a model, not a texture. And then the model will be using the custom texture, and that's the only real difference, right? So for this, I'm going to say models, because I need to have inside of my folder, or namespace. This is a namespace, Minecraft is a namespace, and models and item is a folder, basically. And I want an item folder. And in there, I'm going to make some custom thing, and it's going to be called a hamburger. Why? Because I still have a hamburger asset lying around, and I want to reuse it. I'm efficient. Right, so this is all cool, and I basically just copy-pasted bread, but you can tell it still has the overrides thing, so I'm just going to delete all that. Don't need it. All good. So now I have a hamburger model that uses the Minecraft bread texture. But my bread doesn't actually use that model yet, so what I can do is say commands custom underscore assets, then a colon in the same way that the Minecraft namespace has a colon, and then I say item slash hamburger. All good, it is now using my custom model. Only issue is, even though I'm using my custom model doesn't actually have a custom texture, so nothing changes. Right, so obviously I want to kind of make my texture have the same name, so I can just copy paste the same path, and now I just need to make a path that is the same. So I need to have a textures folder, because that's where the textures belong. I want to have an item folder, because that's where the item textures belong. And now I just need to copy paste a hamburger texture. Right, there we go. So now I have an actual hamburger thingy thing. That looks pretty good. Pretty happy with it, looks nice. And you can tell that this path, commands custom assets, item hamburger, would lead to that image. So now let's actually go ahead and test this out and make sure it actually functions, because I've done this all in one go and I haven't tested anything out while I was doing it, so I have no idea whether or not this actually works. Right, so first of all, what we're going to have to do is actually refresh our resource pack. So for this, I'm going to have to do F3 and T at the same time, and then you can see I have a super cool loading screen. It's awesome. All good. Right, so now that I've reloaded my resource packs, I need to actually give myself my custom bread. For that, the command would be this, so give myself bread. And then you can tell this is custom model data, and here is the exact number that I wrote down before. And it has to obviously be the same number, otherwise you're gonna have issues. Right, so if I now press enter, you can tell I have bread. Super cool, super awesome. And the main important part is that the normal bread is actually fully unchanged. So if someone crafts normal bread, it will always look like this. But if someone runs the command, you can get this. Really cool for map making, data packing, or if you have a server, then you can get a data pack that actually allows players to change number, such as for what example Hermitcraft has, where they have such a system, allowing them to have custom models in the game. Really awesome, really nice, and honestly a great sign that a big server is actually doing that. But yeah, right, so I guess I'm pretty happy now with this actual bread. You can tell it's definitely still bread. If you want to actually have a different name, that is obviously all just part of a, part of the command. You can just do that same as always. If you want to actually know how to do the custom, like making it have a custom use, such as, for example, this. Let me know and I might make a video in the future. It's just a lot more complicated than the tutorials that I've made so far because it is actual programming, which is just more difficult than simply telling the game how something should look. Regardless, I am pretty happy now with this bread actual texture, and I think we can call it finished. So now I would like to make one more actual custom 2D item, and then just to make sure that we actually know everything for sure, after that we can go ahead and make something 3-dimensional. Alright, for the next 2-dimensional model, what I would like to do is actually make a custom netherite sword. So basically, when you're retexturing a sword or a tool or a piece of armor, you need to make sure that if you make it out of a diamond piece of armor and they make it into a netherite piece of armor, that doesn't break it. So I generally use a netherite piece of armor as a starting point. You can also make it, iron, gold, whatever. That also all works, but you need to avoid using diamond if you don't want people to upgrade it and be confused. Anyhow, right, so let's go ahead and just take the netherite sword. That's a lot of trims. Cool, I love that. Netherite sword, please. Right, so you can tell that's netherite sword. I can paste that in, and you can tell it's basically the same as the red one. It's just very similar. The only real difference is this. So what that is the parent model. Right, so the reason that the bread and the netherite sword were all so empty is because all of the logic to actually saying what it should render is actually handled inside of there. So obviously you have the texture here, and that's saying, hey, this is how it should look. And in here it's saying exactly in what way, so how it should be rotated, etc. So handheld is simply just saying, hey, you should have it like a handheld weapon, like a bow or a sword or a pickaxe. The bow itself is a bit different, so you can tell that the bow is not a handheld item. Oops, that was my bad. Okay, never mind. Anyhow, right, so you can tell that, for example, if I look up here to handheld now, what handheld does is simply say, hey, you're using the generated one, like, for example, bread, but you also have these specific display properties. So basically just if you have it in your first person or third person hand, then it looks like you're holding a sword. That's it. Anyhow, right, so what I now need is to still have basically the exact same as this override. So I can copy and paste, and now it's going to look like a hamburger again, but it's a sword. So obviously I don't want it to be a hamburger. So yeah, I can just, for example, copy paste the hamburger one over to a custom sword. And then make sure that this is handheld, because otherwise it won't look like a sword. It'll look like nothing really much. It'll just be bad. And then I actually do also want to have a custom sword texture that we're going to make together, because I do want to actually explain how you edit textures. Right, so obviously you can just go to textures and item, and here you have a lot of vanilla assets. So now I can simply search for, let's say, diamond sword, and copy it over to there, and now rename this to custom sword. And then make sure that inside of custom sword, it is the same text there, save, and now it's good. Now, my netherite sword, when it has that number, will still look like a hamburger because I forgot to change that word. But now, it will actually look like a diamond sword. All good, except for obviously that I don't want it to be a diamond sword. So, now I can go ahead and open this texture in paint.net. And there we are. Right, so now obviously I want to keep the handle thing the same. So I can simply, for example, make everything like this. Like, if I was actually making something myself, I would obviously handpick every single color and just keep tweaking it into oblivion. But this is a tutorial and I have limited time, so I'm just gonna change the hue and call it a day. Right, so now if I save this and go back over to here, you can tell now this is green. So now, assuming that I didn't mess anything up, when I have a netherite sword with this exact number, it should look like a green diamond sword. Right, so now all that I need to do is actually test out and see whether or not that sword actually works in-game. So if I run F3 and T to refresh my resource packs, then use stash give add as netherite sword, custom model data, and then you can tell I've got a netherite sword, and you can also tell them netherite sword still works. And most importantly, if I use F3, you can tell that even though my bread, renders flat in my hand, the sword renders like a sword thanks to that held property that I gave it. But yeah, that should be kind of all that you really need to know about how to add 2D item textures into the game. A quick tip, I recommend sticking to 16 by 16 because that's just kind of how the game looks, and if you want it to fit in better with the game, that is a really nice way to do that. And if you don't, you still want to keep it as a multiple of 16 by 16, so 32 by 32 or 64 by 64, etc, 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 because otherwise you start having like blurred edges in a weird way. So yeah, like, be warned of that. But yeah, now let's go ahead and actually get into the bulk of the video and make some 3D items. Alright, so I have opened up Blockbench, as you can see, and now basically what I want to make is just a really cool fantasy sword and just actually make it look like something awesome. Really go over the top and just basically show you what you can do with these kind of 3D models. Right, so obviously you already have a very big menu with loads of options. Obviously for you it will look a bit differently because Blockbench actually has a lot of customization options, and I have just changed all of the colors that I use to be a bit nicer in my opinion. I don't know, the default theme also has a lot going for it, but yeah, I don't know, I just changed the colors because I felt like it was fun. Right, anyhow, let's start. So basically you have low poly models. Those are models that you can actually do anything with basically. And Minecraft doesn't allow that, because Minecraft is lame and doesn't allow that. Obviously, the Bedrock entity and Bedrock block are just for Bedrock Edition, modded entities are for modded things, Optifine entities are for replacing entities using Optifine. Minecraft skins, I feel like that's self-explanatory. Animated Java is not something that you're gonna have because it is a plugin, which there are a lot of, and oh my god, they are so nice. Yeah, what we want to make is a Java block/item. So these is just, hey, a model that can either replace a block or an item, or both, and that's it. Now, if I click on this, what you can see is that it has some good to know tips saying like, hey, rotation are limited. That is not because of Blockbench, that is because Minecraft literally doesn't allow you to have a smoother rotation. It is really annoying. Then you have also a size limitation. So 3x3x3, you can't make it any bigger than that. For item models, what you can also do, however, is change the display settings so that it just looks larger. You really don't need to go full size with this. Like, if you make 3x3x3 and then put it to the max size in the display settings, then you're gonna have something really, really big. So if you really want something nonsensically big that doesn't function, then you can. And lastly, it just doesn't support animations, so yeah, that's that. But yeah, right, so let's just go ahead and create a new model. And you got this very fancy pop-up on which you're going to say, I am going to ignore it and click away from it, because it doesn't really matter. I have, I think, quite literally only read that thing once and never actually used it. Alright, so now we're actually going to want to get started, right? So I want to place down a cube. That is a tool that I don't want to use. Right, so now you have a couple tools here in the top. So here you have a move tool that is quite clearly this. You can move around an element. Then you have the resize tool, so you can make it slightly bigger, like so. Then you have a rotate tool, which if I put the center there, you can rotate a thing, and you can tell these are the 22.5 degrees axes that I was talking about before, and as you can tell, it is limited on one axis, so you can't rotate it on that and on that. It just doesn't allow you. It's really annoying, and there's not really a good reason for it, if I remember correctly. Then you have the pivot point. What that is just the point that you rotate around. It's not too important for Java block item models, but if you would do something a lot more complicated, if you actually have animations, you can tell how this would actually be relevant. And now you have a really nice tool called vertex snap. So if I really quickly just duplicate the cube and then go to vertex snap, click on here, click on there, then you can tell that it snaps the position over to there. Obviously with these kinds of elements it doesn't matter too much, but if I rotate this and then want the lineup to be exactly, you know, perfect, then I can just say, hey, that corner is over to that corner, and bam, I'm done now, right? Really easy, really convenient. Also, as you can see by all of these, you know, letters next to the things, I have shortcuts for all of these, you know. It is really nice. So what you can do for that is go over to preferences and keybinds, because like I said, oh my goodness, they have a lot of options. It takes a long time to set up everything exactly the way you want it to be, but honestly, it is very worth it. But yeah, let's actually go ahead and get started now with actually making a sword. Right, so I'm just going to go ahead and make something maybe simple, maybe not. I honestly don't really know yet. But I suppose we'll find out sooner or later. Right, so what I first want to do is go over to display, right? And you can tell I actually need to rotate everything. I have this button here because, like I said, you can customize a lot. It's really nice. I think you should have it under transform, yes. And then you have rotate. And then it'll rotate around its pivot points. If you want to center the pivot points on all the elements you have selected, you have this button right here. So you can tell if I do that, then now if I rotate it, it rotates around that. But if I center it, everything works. Right, so basically what I want is to first just really quickly move this over to here. And basically what I want is just to make sure that this looks good. And you can tell it doesn't really look all that good. This is just a bit too bulky. So instead I would like it to be that. I also think that making it one longer will look a bit nicer. And yeah, I'm happy with that. Right. So obviously this is not actually how it's going to end up looking. This is just me already going ahead and changing the way it renders, or the values that it uses to render with, to just basically ensure that I have my proper dimensions all right before I spend way too long with the wrong dimensions. That's all. Right, so now what I want is to actually go ahead probably and actually make the main blade. So for that I have learned a really cool trick, which is to actually make it slightly have depth. So I can probably just do that and then add that. And now you can tell that this is gonna look really bad or really cool depending on how low your standards are. But if I actually add in another element with a size of 0 and just kind of fill out a lot of area, then now this looks even worse. But what I can do is basically make this secondary element have transparency bits basically everywhere, and that way I can add a lot of detail and actually also even depth without actually needing to put in too much work or even violate some of the core rules of Minecraft modeling. Right, so this is already pretty nice. However, what this is going to have a problem with is that both of these sides are going to get their own texture because it's an element. So what I'm simply going to do is select every single side, which you can do by holding Control while clicking on one of them to basically just add it to your section. Then I can right click here, say that the texture of that side is transparent. So you can tell here I have a side, here I don't. And that's just going to make the texture a bit more optimized and just a bit smaller when I actually generate it. Right, so now what I would like to do is actually add some detail over to this element because it's kind of, well, nothing, right? So I can go ahead, rotate an element, reshape it, and then move it using the vertex snap to be like this. And I mean, this looks pretty good. If I now duplicate it and flip it on that axis, then now we've kind of got a cool thingy thing. But I wanted this to be a really, really epic sword. So I'm also going to have to add another one. And then down a bit. There we go. Duplicate and flip. Right, so you can kind of tell what I'm going for now. I feel like, while over here it looks like 4 dimensions, like it should be a bit longer. Considering I'm also going to use up to around here, probably. If you add that space on, then this looks like a pretty decent dimension for the actual blade. Now, what I do want to actually do is go ahead and make this slightly lower. And that will allow me to actually also add some detail around here. Yeah, that should be all good now. Now I can actually go ahead and get started on the next part, which is actually going ahead and making Z fighting all go away. Because what you can tell here is I have 2 elements overlapping over the same area. Obviously it doesn't know which texture to pick, so you can tell whenever I'm hovering over it to actually add a secondary color, it has both consistently and it just looks terrible, right? I think we can all agree on that. So the way that you avoid that is by actually just making them not overlap. So for starters, I feel like this is already way too, bulky. So I might do it like this. I might even lower down another. Alright, that's a bit better, but this might just actually have to be like that. Yeah, that works a bit better. However, now you can actually, if you really pay attention, you can tell there is still some Z fighting. So if this element and this element have 2 different colors, which I might do, then I'm still going to have issues. So if you don't really want to move the element but still want to avoid Z fighting, what you can do is say 0.98 and make that a 1. Now, they are not on the same position because this one is slightly deeper in. And yeah, that just works. Now there's no longer Z fighting because one takes priority over the other. Right, so now I can actually get into making this look good, probably. I should first ensure that this still actually works when I look at it from third person. Yeah, looks pretty neat. You can tell that in the display properties, this element is actually double-sided. That is not actually how Minecraft renders it. If you have only one side of it existing, the other side doesn't have it ever. So the edit menu actually has it correct, not the display menu. Yeah, now that I know actually that this is going to look pretty decent, I can go ahead and actually get started by making the texture. So for that, you're going to want to select every single element. Just Ctrl A if you want to use a shortcut. And then we're going to click on Create Texture. Now this is going to be called Super Cool Sword because I am very original. And I'm going to click on padding to be true. So basically what padding does is ensure that there's going to be a distance between every single texture. So if I click on confirm, you can tell there is a slight bit of spacing right there. Otherwise, it would have everything just kind of shut together. Alright, so that's already pretty good, but you can tell still that this side has nothing, and I didn't want that. So I can copy paste this face, so just clicking on here and then clicking Control C, go over to the west side, and just paste it. But now, if I go ahead and, for example, remove this corner over here, then you can tell over here it's flipped, and I don't like that. So I can simply click on here and click on mirror on the x-axis, and now it's all good. Right, so what I probably want to do is go ahead and make this have a larger brush size and simply delete everything. Right, so now I no longer have that weird mess all around, and I can actually get going on starting picking the colors that I want. So if I go ahead and select the fill mode to select the entire element, then I can go ahead and do some fun stuff. Right, so I want the blade to kind of probably be a bit like that color, I'd say. Obviously, I'm gonna change it a lot. Then I would like these to all be that kind of color. Now, what kind of color do I want for the handle? I feel like just going with a dark color would work really nicely. Then I could even, like, you know, later on go ahead and add some lines like that, which would even add a bit more. And then obviously also texture those lines, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I can see this kind of working. Very nice. Right, so now next up what I want is to actually go ahead and get started on, you know, the extra bulk around it. So what I want to first do is just add some basic shape. Like that. No, I don't think that's quite long enough. I feel like I need to add another pixel there. But also pixels there, and also pixels there. But now that is exactly lining... Ah, that's still a very big size. Now that's exactly lining up with the other one, so I don't actually like that too much. But now that I have this, you can tell it's a pretty, you know, basic sword design. But I didn't want this to be basic, I wanted this to be awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and add some random decorational bits. Maybe I want it to be more like that, actually. No, because now it looks way too short, actually. Yeah, I can't go quite that far up. But I'd say that kind of works. However, now I do actually want to make it a bit taller again. And there we are. I'd say that kind of works. Nice. Right, so now I would like to add a kind of color in the middle of the blade. Just as a kind of fun detail, just to add some level of interest into the actual blade. Nice. And I'd say I'm completely done, 100% done. I am all great. I can add this into the game, and yeah, it'll be fine. Okay, maybe not. But you can tell that I'm kind of done with picking out some random base colors now. So what I want is to, first of all, just have a highlight side of the blade. Right there. And then also probably a darker side over on that side. I feel like that could be working if I just go ahead and add a bit more highlight. Like that. And then also actually add a darker color down here. Right, so that kind of works, but now that the actual center color is absolutely terrible. So I would like that. And now we have something that kind of works. Obviously, this doesn't work too well, but that's also because of the colors that I picked. If I would spend longer on this, then I would obviously get something nicer. Now let's actually also go ahead and add some random details into there. Right, so this needs to be one further, because otherwise I'm getting issues with this being the same on both sides. That kind of works. Right, so that's quite nice, I'd say. Right, so now I actually want to go ahead and add that thing down here that I mentioned. Now I would like to really quickly add an even brighter color for right there, right there, right there. And also on the other side. And go ahead and add a darker color for right there, there, there. And that kind of works, but it's just too dark. There we go, that should be a bit nicer. Alright, that kind of works. Let's really quickly look at it from third person again. I'd say for the amount of time that I've spent on this, already pretty nice. And let's now go ahead and add a bit of a highlight on the outside. Nice. Right, so now obviously the last thing that I really need to texture is down here. Right, good. Now I still want a darker color. Right, so obviously if I spend a bit more time on this, I would actually be able to get a bit nicer with the actual like texturing up here. I'm not too happy with the actual like colors that I picked for that. But all in all, I'd say it kind of works, at least well enough for a tutorial to demonstrate a point. So yeah, I can say that I'm now kind of just done with this, right? So I can go ahead and save this texture. And then now I can go ahead and actually obviously fill in this path towards my resource pack. And then just save this as super cool sword, sure. Now I am actually also going to have to save the model, for which I can just copy paste the path towards my models folder, save. And now over here is next to my hamburger and my custom sword. I can add a new model and just name this super cool sword. And now I can go ahead and look at it in my editor. So you can tell, obviously I have a path here towards commands, custom assets, item, super cool sword. That matches what I have over here. And now I have a whole bunch of assets, or elements actually. Apologies. And these elements are just actually every single cube that I made, or cuboid. And then here you have the display properties, and you can tell all I have is left hand and right hand for third person. So I'm actually going to want to go ahead and actually add the display properties for all the other sides as well. So if I'm from first person, well then I can move this around a bit, maybe make it a tiny bit smaller so it doesn't look up your screen as much. Rotate it a tiny bit and copy that over to the left hand as well. The head doesn't really matter because you're not gonna put a sword on your head, I hope. Then on the ground, all cool. Let's rotate that slightly so that makes a bit more sense. Make that 0.4 because my goodness, that is a very big sword. And move it back a bit. Alright, that's all good. Now you still have the GUI. So let's go ahead and rotate that 90. For now, I also would like it rotated slightly like that. Make it 45. And now I just need to make it smaller by 5. Place that. That is way too small. Point. 575. There we go. And now you might tell that this is actually a bit darker than what I made before. So if you want it to be just a bit brighter, then you can say that instead of side light, it is front light. And now, bam, everything is lit exactly like a 2D item, and it just should look a bit nicer. It doesn't work for everything. Like if you have a 3D model that actually has depth and you want it to look like it has depth in your GUI, then this might not work. But for my purposes right now, this just works fine. I probably do want to lower it down by 1 though. There we go. Right, now I can just resave, open up my model again, and you can tell all of a sudden now I have a lot more display properties. Right, that's all good, but obviously all I have now is the same as this hamburger. I have a model which uses a texture, but no item ever uses this model, right? Because I never told anything to use super cool sword. So I can just go back over to my netherite sword.json, copy paste this, add a comma because otherwise this isn't a list and it will break. And now, obviously, if I leave this as this number, then it will always use this one. Because if it matches that, it will also match that, obviously. I need to up that number by 1. So now what I can say is that this is not custom sword, this is super cool sword without the typo, because otherwise you're gonna have issues. Right, so that should be it. So now I should go ahead and look at what it looks like in-game. Make sure everything is working. Alright, so now I'm gonna go ahead and give myself the new sword. So I can just take the old command and change the number by 1. And now you can tell it doesn't actually work. And that's because I never refresh my resource pack. Make sure you always refresh. You have no idea how annoying it is to debug something if you forgot to refresh. Right, so you can tell now I've got my normal basic sword, I've got my even basicer sword, and I've got my cool sword. Yeah, and that's kind of literally all that there is to it. Really, honestly, quite simple, and yet really quite awesome. Like, could you imagine just walking up to people with this sword? If they are not expecting this to have, like, custom models, like whatever server you're on, this is gonna be awesome. Alright, so that was it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed, maybe learned something. If anything didn't work for you, once again, just go down in the description and join my Discord. It'll be all good, and I'll try to help you from there. But yeah, with that all said and done, hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.